At no point in your rambling, incoherent response were you even close to anything that could be considered a rational thought.
Welcome to the Author Your Brand Show. I'm your host, Doug Crow, and you're going to want to take notes. If you don't take notes, that's okay also, because they're below here. You can actually click below and download the show notes. Please subscribe. If you have a comment to make, I'd love to hear that as well. Our guest today is a former Air Force officer, thank you for your service, turned real estate enthusiast. That's a good swing from aviation to real estate. During his journey from military service to executive roles, he's taken a pivotal turn during the 2009 Great Recession, which we all very familiar with that, which let him discover the potential of real estate investing. While people were dying in the markets, this guy was thinking in the future. So he mentors clients through his ideal wealth grower strategy. We'll talk more about that and how to help you manage or grow your portfolio and your income and your bunch of stuff with real estate. We all know how valuable that is as an investment. So without further ado, welcome our guest today, Alex Meierhoefer. Alex, how are you? Axel, not Axel.
Yeah, hey.
Axel, not Axel. When I say Alex,
Yeah.
I'm sure
Either
I'm
way,
not the first
it's okay.
person to do that, right?
No, absolutely not. I was just about to say I jump for either.
Oh my gosh. I'm so excited to talk to you. I got a background in real estate investing, so this could probably go longer than 20 minutes or 25, but we got to keep it brief for people. And I love what we talked about before the show started. We want to talk about why anyone should listen to this conversation for the next 20, 25 minutes. It has a lot to do with our most valuable commodity. It's not money, but time, right?
Exactly. Yeah, I agree.
Right. And Axel is going to talk to us about how we can manage almost any size portfolio with about an hour a month. I can't wait to hear more about that, Axel. But before we get into the details and the good stuff here, I want to know more about you. How did you get involved? That transition from the U.S. Air Force to real estate. What was the pivotal moment here?
Well, in a way, it was partially the transition, retiring from the Air Force. And like you mentioned earlier, I initially got a job as an executive in a software company, but that was only for a very limited amount of time. And even though as a retired officer, you get a little bit of a pension, but it's typically not enough to sustain your life forever, right? So it was pretty clear. And when I started my first own business in consulting after leaving that executive role, it became clear we need to do something, but I also wasn't a spring chicken anymore. So we needed to do something for one that will actually generate cash flow and additional income, but also something, and I always felt that kind of like as a generational mandate to have something that we can hand over to our daughter. And then now we also have a grandson and so forth, right? So those two components, and obviously there are different ways on how you can invest, but when you go through the military career, you're being moved around and you're renting and you're owning and you're living on base and stuff. So you're constantly in this process of being faced with real estate. And when I started looking into it, taking courses and studying it, I saw that a lot of successful people ultimately ended up investing in real estate. And so that's how we got started.
Yeah, for all its a little bit of challenges in the past few decades, it's still been a benchmark to our economy, of course. What was your first property you invested in?
Well, the first investment property as a true investment property was actually in the same neighborhood where we were living, my wife and I. There was an area of relatively new built houses, and we knew that the government was basically paying the rent for the tenants. So we thought, wow, that is actually a pretty cool deal. You never have to be worried that you don't get rent when the government pays for it. So we bought a property and put an Air Force officer in as a tenant with his family. So that was our first experience, and it wasn't a good one, by the way.
You said you're traveling around or being moved around as a veteran, of course, is one thing. But I never thought about the guys that are renting on their bases. That's a good strategy with a government guaranteed rent on that. Do you still invest in those types of properties to help out people are on bases?
No, it's kind of, I transition over to the other side where basically people that are in military service, ideally the sooner the better, but at any stage in their career, to take advantage of the VA loan option that they have. But yeah, with this particular property, the deal was that this officer claimed that he had never heard that if you use a fireplace, you have to open the chute. So he basically started to do a fire in the house without opening the chute, and you can imagine where that's going.
Oops.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's.
So I mean, it was a good thing in a sense, because when we later started our turnkey strategy for our investors and ourselves, I looked, and most turnkey providers, they actually, if they renovate a property, they close off all the fireplaces. And
Yeah.
I always said, yeah, I like your properties because you closed off the fireplace, because I was too dumb with my first one, and they ruined the whole living room and dining room area because of it. You know.
I've never thought about. I thought fireplace would be a value add. I know pools can reduce the value of a property because people worried about maintenance and drowning, but I didn't know fireplaces could have a negative aspect to it.
Yeah, there's
So
one version that you can use, and I know some people actually do it, but even that is kind of tricky. There are some that have this automatic starter, and they basically make a fire with a gas starter. But the problem is, if anything goes wrong, then you have gas flowing into the house, so it's not ideal either. I by now I would literally say just close it off and just tell them, okay, if they want to do a fire, go outside. You know.
keep it simple. So you've got our portfolio now of you have a fund that you're raising capital for and properties that people they pool it. How does your structure work with your company?
No, while we have a portfolio of properties, those are all individual properties that we acquired over the years, and they're all basically run by turnkey providers. And we basically offer two things for anybody who is interested to work with us. The one is fundamentally say, I can give you access to all the relationships that I've built over the last 10, 15 years, to lenders, to turnkey providers, to insurance providers, to property managers, and so forth and so forth. That's one option when somebody says, okay, I've been doing some investing. I don't really need to learn the basics and some of the organizational stuff. I want to get access to these off-market properties, because I can tell you that what I'm finding, the good deals, even in this environment with a relatively high interest rates and stuff like that, are the ones that you don't find on Redfin or Zillow or Realtor or stuff like that. Yeah. We get our deals all directly from our turnkey providers. And then the second option is
I was going to say, they're mainly single family homes. Is that your main
single family, duplex, triplex, fourplex. We do everything between single and fourplex to stay within that same legal frame and not go into the commercial real estate frame.
Right.
And commercial is, the traditional residential commercial is suffering a little bit right now. The really big commercial that's suffering is anything like office buildings and stuff. Yeah. So ours is basically residential. And then the other option is that people can join us for the mentoring program. And obviously the mentoring program includes all the other things I just mentioned, but also how do you actually create a corporate structure that protects you, protects your asset, protects your family, gets you a trust, and creates what's called a series LLC structure, so that in the worst case scenario where somebody convinces a judge that you are for some reason responsible for an injury that somebody got while in your property, that the worst case that can happen based on that structure is that you lose that one property out of your portfolio, right? Because a lot of people forget that they are, in most cases, when they initially come to us, they're personally liable for almost everything, right? Because they don't have this corporate structure. Now, even business owners, I'm sometimes surprised, they have their business and they know about the legal aspects of their business, but when it comes to their investing, they see that basically as a personal or kind of private thing. And even though it is, legally, you are, as an owner, the same as if you own a business, right? And so the protection, in my opinion, should be the same, that you say, okay, each property should be held in such a way that any kind of lawsuit has to struggle. And more importantly, if you start building a portfolio, like in our case, it can ultimately grow from a pure asset value into like $3, $4, $5 million worth of asset. And you have to think about the fact when somebody says, I think Doug did something wrong, I go to a lawyer and say, I think we should sue Doug. The first thing they look is, what does Doug own? Is it worth our effort?
Right.
If they see Doug and his family own 9 properties, straight out title and financing all in their name, wow, they have 4 million in assets. That's worth going after. If on the other hand, they find, okay, Doug, like we can find Doug. We can find the address, and in the county records, there is a company, but that company has no activity, no tax filings, no nothing.
Internet's not being helpful today, Axel. I'm sorry, it's frozen. All right, back from our commercial break, and we're back with Mr. Axel Meierhoefer talking about real estate, but more important than real estate, I think, is going to be the value of the one commodity we can't leverage or really duplicate or save or anything. That's time. So I think it's a big part of what you're talking about, Axel. Let's talk more about how the value of time relates to what you guys are doing.
Yeah, I mean, we spoke a little bit about this whole idea and this whole approach of using turnkey providers, right? And I mean, one of the things that I like to compare to is, like, in a sense, like a really full service bank, right? You don't just get an account, you get, all kinds of other services. And so for a turnkey provider, for your audience, just as a quick recap, they are basically a company who made it their business to go into a certain area, typically around a larger town, or maybe if it's, not that big, maybe 2 or 3 in a 10, 20, 50-mile radius. And they go in the different neighborhoods and look for what I call the ugly duckling in a good neighborhood. And they try to buy it as low as possible, typically from like heirs that got it from their parents, and it's way away from where they live and they don't really look after it or something like that. So they buy it, and then they have a renovation team, basically like a mini contracting company. And they go in and they renovate this ugly duckling to the most recent building codes and bring it up to snuff, but also keeping in mind that they're doing it for investors. So they're renovating it with investor owners in mind, right? So they're looking at luxury vinyl plank floors rather than putting carpet everywhere, knowing that if you have turnover, you basically always have to do the carpet over. Right? Anybody who owns property has seen that, or other things like that. So there are certain things that you do, paint choices and other stuff, that make it durable without necessarily being more expensive, at least if you do it right from the get-go. Now they also do like new plumbing, new electrical, all that kind of stuff. So here we are. Let's say find this thing, they renovate it, now they put it up at an appraisal price. And I also always find this to be really important to realize. Oftentimes, if you hear people talk about turnkey providers, they're kind of vilified a little bit because they say, well, if I compare this to flipping, they buy it, renovate it, put it up, and then, if I'm a flipper, then I'm only really putting in as much as I need, and I get the difference between that and the sale, while they get basically market rate. I call it the appraisal price because they put it up knowing that most investors would want to finance it. And so they can't really ask for more than what it would appraise for, because the bank wouldn't give you more money than that. So now they have basically to do this, a marketing and sales department, and I am in the envious situation that I have good relationships to multiple of these turnkey providers, and they tell me, hey, we have another property ready. Those things are never on Zillow or Redfin or Roofstock or all that kind of stuff. They are in this community, right? So now we have this property at an appraisal price, and the real important thing, at least in the beginning, it can change over time, and it has changed in some cases for me as well when I changed from them to other property managers. But in the beginning, I find it important that property management is the third department that they also provide. So they have purchasing and construction, renovation, marketing and sales, and property management all under the same roof. And when you come to this point that you mentioned about time and the value of time, when you have all these components under one roof and you say, okay, I want to build a cluster with this turnkey provider in Ohio, you can buy over time 4 or 5 properties under that umbrella. And all you do is when they send you your monthly report about any kind of maintenance that they did, or the rent that they collected and the distribution that you received, on the bottom, it has a little link that says schedule your monthly call. And so you schedule your monthly call and talk to them for 30 minutes to say, how is my cluster, my portfolio, my grouping, whatever you want to call it, doing? And if you, over time, like in my case, we have 2 clusters already and we are starting a new one in a 3rd location. So if you spend 30 minutes with each of them once a month, you're spending an hour, hour and a half at the most.
Wow. Nice. Are the clusters always geographically together, or could they be like in different cities, but there's still a cluster in your portfolio?
Well, they could be diversified, but in my opinion, and I only know of one single company that really allows you to do that, and that is a company called REI Nation. I'm not affiliated with them. I don't get anything for mentioning them, but they started out in Memphis. They were originally called Memphis Invest, and then they discovered, hey, there is a pretty cool developing market in Dallas. And then they discovered there's a pretty cool developing market in St. Louis and so forth. So they now have, I don't know because I'm not following them closely, but 5 or 6 markets. All of them are following the same model. And so if you were becoming a client of theirs, and I have to say for your audience, their product is at the higher end of the market. That's just a choice. Not every turnkey provider follows exactly the same model to every detail. But this, I just want to say this one thing for the time question you asked. I mean, making 2 30-minute calls or having one hour call, it's still, yeah. So in Ohio, we are right now, our cluster, if you want to call it that, is in the area between Dayton and Cincinnati.
Dayton and Cincinnati. Okay, so the southern area, southeast or so. Nice.
Yeah.
And then what about Illinois?
Illinois, we are right at the border between Idaho and Illinois. I call it the west of Chicago cluster. The city you may have heard about is called Davenport.
Okay, Iowa, and yeah, I know what that is. Yeah, Davenport, Iowa, sure. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's actually, what is, if anybody knows anything about industry, it's the world headquarters of John Deere. So there's a reason why we're there.
That's right. That's right. So mainly single-family homes, that there's specialty for those clusters of home rentals there, right?
Single or duplex, everything between single and fourplex, basically to stay within the same regulatory and tax frame that is there for like regular homes.
Right. Okay. And what are some of the biggest challenges you faced as a aggregator of these properties for investors? What's the biggest challenge you've overcome?
Well, one of the issues is obviously that you have to be aware that people, when they struggle, they have to make sometimes really tough choices. And so I mentioned REI Nation, and they deliberately stay in the A and B type properties. They have similar criteria to the turnkey providers I'm working with and provide to our clients. But by being in these higher end areas and applying these criteria, they have a little less turnover. In our case, we are more in the B and C plus areas. Why do we do this? Because you get a better ratio between the purchase price and the rent income. Like like literally right now, I have a duplex for one of our newest clients, $180,000, $2,000 rent, $1,000 each side, right? In most of the places that REI is operating in, you couldn't even find it, even if you wanted to. Now, on the other hand, the industry, the economy, the kind of people are the types of people who don't have tons and tons of money. They're actually stretching quite a bit, especially with recent inflation, to make rent and car payments and credit card payments and all these other things. And so what we have found, I would say, in the last 2 years is that the dependability has become more challenging. And that is then, to answer your question, also the thing, like especially a new investor who starts with their first, let's say, duplex. Yes, I can even show 2 examples of my own where I still, in 2 of my clusters, I have 2 properties each where the tenant never left from the day I bought the property 5 years ago. And that's what you want, obviously, right? But then we also had recently 2 that we had to actually go all the way through eviction, right? And that's really hard for somebody who maybe come from like a 401k or from a mutual fund investing
Sure.
background, or like has normally invested in ETFs or stuff like that. And I can only
Hmm.
get across the principle of how stuff works, but I cannot predict exactly will your house and the tenants that property management is going to find for this house going to be the ones who never leave and love
Yeah.
your house, or going to be the ones who after 6 months are starting to struggle to pay the rent because the wife lost her job.
Yeah.
You just don't know. And
Yeah.
that to basically, and this is why, in our name we have Ideal Wealth Grower, right? And Ideal is all about what are we doing and how are we doing it. Grower is really my version of coaching and mentoring. And that becomes
Hmm.
ultimately sometimes the more important aspect, to say, how can I coach and mentor you through a phase where you had the property for a year, everything was nice, you were already starting to count your cash flow, everything that you made, and then
Right.
suddenly something happens and you're kind of somewhat surprised, and now you need to work through that, not because you want to get rid of the property or stuff like that. It's just stuff that happens in life. And I have to say, in our
Yeah.
really, it appears, more stressed economic environment, it just seems to happen a little more often lately.
Yeah. So in conclusion, I want to find out from your perspective, what's been the biggest constant in all the real estate challenges with inflation, interest rates? What's been the one constant that keeps real estate an attractive investment?
Well, the one thing that I would say is that, in a way, real estate has always maintained its ratio. And that sounds maybe a little
Hmm.
abstract, but let me give you an example. And actually, my friend, I call him my friend, even though I've never met him, Keith Weinhold, but I'm an avid follower, and you may have heard about him. Keith recently, in one of his newsletters, did it just brilliantly, and that's why I use this now. He said, if you look at the statistics of 1920, an average house in a
Hmm.
area in typical areas was about $9,000. And if you take the average price now nationwide, is around not quite $400,000. This is on the whole
Hmm.
United States. And it took about eight and a
Sure.
half 1 kilo gold bars to buy an average house in 1920. And it takes 9
Yeah.
gold bars now to buy an average house today. And that is what I mean
Yeah.
by the ratio that has kind of remained the same, right? Now,
Hmm.
obviously, if you had these gold bars from the 1920s or whenever you got them and you turn them in today, you get a much bigger pile of little green pieces of paper, right?
Right.
But that's really, I think, a very interesting way of expressing why the statement that
Hmm.
real estate has maintained its value for more than 100 years, in the same way, like everybody said, what's the most thing that is for 5,000 years never lost its value is gold. Well, if you look from 1920 to now, it's the same thing with real estate, at least on the residential level.
Hmm.
And so that's for me the biggest
Yeah.
argument, right?
Yeah, I love it. People need to live somewhere. And I would probably add to that saying that, you can obviously leverage stocks, whatnot, with an options or, you can borrow against that. But real estate is the one asset, I believe, that you can actually have some degree of control over, and you can make a return on borrowed money. The leveraged aspect of it is good. And if you structure the deal right, there's appreciation in cash flow on a a leveraged investment. It's got a lot of advantages to it. So, and if you structure the deal right, there's appreciation in cash flow on a a leveraged investment. It's got a lot of advantages to it. So
Like I was just to reiterate, you have actually really way more control if you think about it. If you take any stock you could buy,
yeah,
we don't even want to go to ETFs and mutual funds and
sure,
stuff, but if you were to say, I'm completely infatuated with a particular company, you can own their stock,
right,
but you have no say what happens with the company or what money they spend on or how they
yeah,
operate and how good or bad. If you own a piece
yeah,
of real estate, I mean, first and foremost, you have obviously the choice if you're close enough to manage it yourself. But even if you use our thing out of
mm-hmm.
state, let the turnkey provider do it. If something goes wrong, you are completely in charge. It's your thing. You can
That's right,
change management, you can change tenants, you can literally even go as far as say, I don't want it anymore, but I still retain
mm-hmm.
the value and get another one for it. right? And so, you know, I was, as a Tesla shareholder, I was just like on pins and needles last week for this shareholder vote because some court judge somewhere said, okay, what the shareholders wanted is not valid anymore, and we had to vote again. Same result, luckily. But that a judge can say the owners didn't know enough, and so therefore what they said at 75% margin of approval doesn't count.
Yep.
That would never happen in your real estate. Just there is no judge who's
Right?
going to
It's
tell
like,
you what
sorry,
you
I'm
want
in
to do with
charge
your
here.
property. You know.
Yeah.
So.
It's almost no comparison. How do people get a hold of you?
Well, the easiest is to go to ideawealthgrower.com. If you get to the website, somewhere in the upper right-hand corner, there's a little button that says either discovery call, complimentary call, book a call. I think they change it all the time, but that's what you should do. And then we talk.
Okay.
And I like to get to know people, have a conversation. And if what we do fits to what you want to accomplish, great. And otherwise, just grow the network.
Mm-hmm. You got it. Idealwealthgrower.com. Check it out, folks. Axel, I really appreciate you having the show today. Folks, if you want to take notes, I hope you did. If you didn't, you can click below here and download the notes and contact with Axel. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Doug.